Tēnā koe everyone, I have Matthew Tukaki online with me right now. Kia ora, and thank you for coming.
Oh, good to be with you.
Right, that's the formalities out of the way. People can look at our histories and our background online. You can do that for yourself, but it's the 1st of March, and every month I've got to focus in the Line Academy, and this month is Crisis Leadership, how to lead in crisis. And we went to #1 on LinkedIn with Crisis Leadership, Matthew, so we know what we're talking about. But you have to be a different type of leader in crisis. You've got to be that rock in the river, and you can't be afraid of stuff. And so our initial conversation was, thank you for coming on, Matthew. I'm just frustrated with how slow we are at adopting. And you were giving us some background on how fast we used to be, and now we've become risk averse. What happened?
Yeah, I mean, back in for New Zealand for many years is a long, proud history of coming up with really creative, innovative social economic policy, right? The welfare state was created off the back of a safety net for New Zealanders who were doing it tough after the Depression. The innovations after women manning our munitions factories and our infrastructure as men went off to war in World War II, and then all of a sudden that changed the fabric and the dynamic of New Zealand society. You know, women were no longer wanting to stay in the kitchen sort of business, chained to those god awful old ovens. National superannuation was born in this country. Women were given the vote in this country, the first in the world. The Māori electorates have been in place for some time, and so on and so forth. And then right through to the reforms of the early 80s as a result of the Muldoon government, the bringing into being of what we know as the Reserve Bank Act, which fundamentally revolutionised the way that New Zealand operated. Our reliance on the UK and Europe was cut during the butter, so to speak, crisis of the 1970s, and we were forced to diversify our economy. So at every point in our history, we have been leaders and innovators in really good social, economic and public policy. But for some reason, probably in the last 20 odd years, we've become much more risk averse. We've become less likely to want to innovate or see really big reforms through to their natural conclusion. And I said to a couple of people yesterday, one of my readings on why that is, that risk aversion, is because, sadly, we now have to deal with coalition governments. And from first past the post, where you could rely on a single flag and a single coloured government, these days you've got coalitions with different interests and competing policies, and you've got to bring all that together and then still get on with the business of running the country. And now we're on our second significant crisis, I'd say, since 2007. That first big crisis was the GFC, the global financial crisis. And now the second crisis, which is not economic or financial, it's more health. And of course, that's the pandemic. But from those crises normally come really big, bold ideas. And certainly that's the case. That's it. You know, when you can either just be...
Well, there's heaps of those big, bold ideas out there. And this is what I've just been itching to get you on this, because we can whack this back and forth with no fear. We have no fear to talk about this stuff, Matthew, because we've both been global and we've had global businesses. I know your history of Drake and all that whole side of things, where it's not a democracy. It's like when you've got a mission to achieve, you achieve it. You put the best team together and you build the culture for sure. But there's an objective to achieve. And being a veteran and being an ex-cop, it's legislation and social policy that gets it across the line. And we'll end up on talking about the protest stuff later. But I want to start out here globally. We're a different animal. We're very fortunate because we've been exposed to a global mindset. My frustration is I come back to New Zealand, I've got a solution to youth suicide. I wrote the world's first good news book about PTSD for veterans. I got all of these solutions, all of these big, bold ideas. We do fee for service for Wāranga Tamariki, care and protection, youth justice, intensive wraparound service, Ministry of Education. We have programs that are helping. We've been invited to do 396 applications and proceeds of crime applications. So we know how it all works, but there's just this intellectual culture of we've got to run it through all of these things first to see if it works. It's been working overseas for us for years, mate. How are you qualified to look at this on a global scale while you're sitting at a desk here in New Zealand thinking if it's going to work or not? It just blows my mind.
Yeah, you know, one of the things about evaluating outcomes, and I think that's where a lot of government organisations and entities lean into, well, we've got to evaluate the outcome to see how successful it's going to be. The only tool that evaluation is really good for is to not measure success so much, but identify where there might be gaps in a program and build the blocks on top of it to plug those gaps. But in Aotearoa, in Australia and other countries as well, we miss the opportunity to innovate on what that pre-existing idea is. And we know this in business, the innovation life cycle, right?
Yep.
So you're not always going to get everything right, or you might release a product into the market and somebody's already done it. So what you need to do is identify what they've already done, the lessons that they've learned, and then innovate on that pre-existing idea.
Yep.
That's the sort of stuff that is missing, to be frank, from really good, effective public policy in New Zealand. I mean, I share the frustration. I'm a little bit more fortunate because, you know, I'm of the character where I've just come home and I've decided, well, you know, no one can sack me. What are you going to do? Sack me? I'll just go next door and get on another bus. And if the other bus in the car park doesn't want me, I'll just go build my own bus. And so there is that confidence, but there's also that mindset of some New Zealanders, particularly in senior executive positions, and even in iwi and hapu and the world of te ao Māori, where, well, you know, what would you know? You haven't lived here for the last 20 years or whatever the case might be. So you've got all of these different barriers you've got to overcome, because we start off, it's like those old New Zealand ads from the 1990s, you know, Aotearoa, home to the world's greatest travellers. And, you know, as young people, we get that into our head and we go off. I mean, we spend gap years in the UK and Europe and the United States. We travel to far distant lands. You know, we experience things, we build things, and then we want to bring that home. But ironically, the reciprocal journey isn't as welcoming.
It's interesting, like especially the Air New Zealand ads, because where they went just it drove me insane. Like, so 6 weeks ago, I sent out a formal interview request for all the political leaders, and obviously with Chris Luxon's Air New Zealand background, if I ever get him on camera, because no one's responded to me in 6 weeks out of everyone, except for yourself, Mark Mitchell, and Marama Davidson. So Mark Mitchell came on, did an interview. Ron Mark's always keen. He's like, he's not scared of anything, so he did an interview. But I was going to hit Chris Luxon. I'm saying, why did you go away from Kiwis and traveling and All Blacks and rugby to like trying to be American hip hop dudes? I'm like, what were you doing? You know. So,
remember that ad in the laundry, the laundrette or whatever the heck it was. Yep. I mean, yeah, big as absolute belief, because we missed that central message that we want to inspire our young people to travel. But equally, what we've got to be prepared when we welcome our whānau home, that we want their knowledge and their experiences to permeate the next iteration of our community's well-being, our economy, our social fabric. And my biggest fear is that we turn a lot of well-meaning New Zealanders off, and they end up saying, well, you know what, I'm probably more wanted overseas than I am at home. And that's sad.
That's what happened to most of us. You talk about, look, I'll jump on this bus and this bus and this bus, and if there's not a bus going where I'm going to build it. And that's what we had to do with the academy. So yeah. we were consultants and speakers and authors and trainers coming into organizations to share, hey, if you want to take your business from here to here, in this particular lane where we have an expertise, whether it's mental health, whether it's crisis leadership, we can assist. And it's like, well, they're actually not qualified to assess our expertise anymore, Matthew. Like the people that are going to assess what we're capable of achieving are people on very low salaries with no global experience, and they're actually not qualified to assess it. And I saw something recently, we're dealing with, the Crown put together a new team to assess all the programs for state sector, right? So they put a team together that all the subcontractors for Rangatamariki and Ministry of Pacific People. Finally, someone said, hey, all this money we're spending on these program providers, is any of this stuff working? You know? And as a result of that, they've got this team together where they've set the standards really high, which I think is brilliant, because in business, we have to meet all those standards.
Yeah.
But what I'm seeing now is the space to even submit that has been locked down. So if we have the highest youth suicide rate in the world and we've got a solution, where's the conversation? Like you did this in Australia where's the space? Well, why do we get to create the space?
Yeah, Dion, you raise a really interesting point, because the next part of the creation, innovation life cycle is implementation, right?
Yeah.
And so all of these different public policies, which are, and look, the public service here in New Zealand, I'll back, because they are good people. They're trying to do a tough job in a current environment that is, to be frank, pretty brutal. And there's so many different challenges that people don't consider, such as, you know, closing the border was one thing, but what did that mean for the labour shortage that was already here in our schools and our hospitals and so on and so forth? So there's all sorts of different dynamics. But coming back to it, where we lose the opportunity is in the implementation of the idea, and that's when the rubber needs to hit the road. So what are we procuring and who are we procuring and what purpose? how long are we procuring the program for to enable it to reach success? Yep. What do we do when we have a look at a program that's only, say, this small down in, I don't know, Invercargill? Why don't we invest in expanding that program, increasing its capacity, therefore capability, and therefore how do we export it to another area of New Zealand or another area, and so on and so forth? So how do we grow things to scale? So that implementation part is often missing. The other thing that we've got, to be honest, an issue with is we have, in this country, we have consultants for Africa. We have so many consulting firms and consultants all trying to, I don't know, vie for the same bit of business. And they produce some really interesting reports. But the truth is, I mean, if I needed another sales and marketing report with glossy photos and whakatokis in it, you know, I'd be here until the next century. And so, again, what we've got to do is basically clear the decks, clear our thinking, and focus, once a policy has been developed, on implementation. Otherwise, we'll end up doing what we've always done and expecting the same result. And for me, personally, I'm fixated on a whole series of outcomes. You know, we've delivered the report into Oranga Tamariki, Tukaki Aroha. And by the way, that is the first time a report of that nature about an organisation that is so much under the lens more than any other government agency has gone through, and all recommendations from Cabinet have been accepted in record speed. And we're now in the final stages of implementation of all of those recommendations and what we call the Future Direction Plan. The next one is the Workforce Development Council. It's one thing to say we're going to reform the polytechnic sector, or kapai, anybody can say that. Yeah. But what does that mean?
Anyone can say anything at the moment, can't they? Especially
right. So what does that mean for our whānau on the ground in respect of mātauranga Māori and lived experience, and how do we reduce the time it takes for a qualification? Say, for example, mental health support workers, which let's say might take 12 months for a qualification to be gained. Well, if we map that lived experience and that mātauranga Māori of that individual, then we might be able to reduce that qualification from 12 months to 6 months.
Why isn't this available for people to put into? So, like, we did exactly what you said, but we came the other way. So we came around the other side, because I'm running alongside, seeing this process, like, okay, that's cool, because now we're starting to talk about lived experience and qualifications being in the same room. But again, those policies have been designed by people that don't have the background. They've been implemented by people that don't have the background. And so where the background always comes from is from business. And so if New Zealand was a corporate organization that you were the CEO of, not the prime minister in that political system, then it would be a totally different thought process. But we're now applying a business thought process to policy. Yeah. But I mean, if we ever see KPIs, timeframes, and outcomes, and people held responsible, we get that far into policy.
Well, we would. But the other thing too, Dion, and this is the really important part of my thinking, that everything that you see me doing is a dot that joins to another dot. And I just explain that. So I'm passionate about suicide prevention and mental health. I led the reforms in Australia for 11 odd years or whatever it was. And one of the things I'm committed to, so people will, hang on, let me step back. People might say, well, geez, Matt, what are you doing on a Workforce Development Council when you don't have any School C qualifications and you didn't even pass maths? And this is the cutting edge of the technical vocational education sector. Well, I'll tell you what it is. There are two levers that I think are important. Number one, if we can reduce the time frame for qualifications to be achieved in, say, mental health, and also supplementary and ancillary health support workers, because we know there's a massive demand for those roles, and we don't have the people available to meet that demand, then that will tick that box. We'll deliver more people into those roles to meet that demand, because we know one of the amplifications of COVID-19 is more stress on whānau, right? Anxiety, nervousness, fear of the future.
Can we hold that bit for 1 second?
Just let me finish. The second lever that's really important into this is that I know, as a former head of Drake, that if we are able, Dion, to move our whānau into higher skilled jobs, then they're going to be paid more, because that demand exists, wages are higher. The biggest alleviator, or the biggest thing that we can pull, the lever that we can pull to reduce poverty in this country, is increasing the potential of wages and access to higher incomes for our whānau. So that's one of the dots that I talk about being joined up. It's not just about the qualification so much as it is about the poverty alleviation.
You're preaching to the choir, and let's put this into a live context for people watching this right now. Let's talk about domestic violence, right? So we found a particular woman, which is a global company, and we deal with trauma and all that whole side of things. Manaba Davidson's dealing with the national policy on that, and we've got stuff sitting there ready to go. when you talk about qualifications, mental health and suicide, I'm the guy that everyone comes to when they can't get anything through the system. I've got politicians in here, I've got CEOs in here, corporate board, all the stuff that they can't officially talk about, they end up talking to me. They can't use the medical model, Matthew. So they have to come to a lived experience model that many of us have now. And so when we're talking about qualifications, we're only talking about qualifications in one modality in the medical model. We're not bringing everyone together. Now we're doing better with culture. And we had Te Whare Tapa Whā, which is real basics and pose in a whare. We're taking that across into Hokai Rangi, same thing, pose in the whare. But to grow that out, you've got to have access to the other modalities. So I could give you a list right now of going, okay, so if someone, let's say youth is a classic example. I've got an 8-year-old and a 9-year-old taken by SIFs when they're 8 and 9. They're now 15 and 16. So they don't have any qualifications, but I can help them earn income here online and YouTube. So now the 15-year-old is one of my videographers and editors in the Line Academy, coming from Care and Protection as an 8-year-old. And he's here earning $125 an hour working for me in the academy. So, filling the belly and filling the mana is cool, but you've got to fill the wallet for these kids. And if we're going to look at higher level jobs, what are the industries for these jobs? I mean, it's online stuff, it's entrepreneur stuff. And I saw the Entree Hub you guys were too early for, by the way, Matthew. It's a brilliant thing. You were too early. So what year was Entree Hub? Tell everyone about Entree Hub, because this is why I like this conversation, because people haven't.
We founded the Entree Hub back in 2010. It was actually to address a business problem, and the business problem was pretty simple. I just didn't have the time to spend with a whole lot of people that were coming to me asking me how to raise capital, how to get into markets, how to do this or the next thing. So what I decided to do was, well, let me create a platform that I can just send everybody to. We'll develop all this content, and the irony is, the content is still relevant today. But you're right, that wasn't so much about did I want to create something big and massive and it was going to take off. Actually, what I was doing is building myself a time-saving tool because I was just so busy. In the end, like MaoriEverywhere.com that I created just over 2 years ago, MaoriEverywhere.com has now 112,500 subscribers. The Entre Hub is now much bigger than that, and we just haven't had the time to update the content. But
thinking is exactly the same thing we did in the academy. Like I can't go out as a onesie and consult and teach everyone. So we had to create the academy, put all the courses and all the frameworks in here so people can access it at any time. But then if they go, hey, Dion, can you come in here, sort this issue out, then we can go in and take the team and run a workshop, do what we need to do. So again, the thing's too early. You were too early, Matthew.
Yeah, way too early. Well, the other one that was too early was the Sustain Group. I mean, we got into the business of carbon accounting again back in 2010, and green jobs were a big thing, and everyone was going for emissions trading schemes and carbon pass-through and all the rest of it. We were probably about 6 years too early.
Yep. Well, I used to talk to Simon Sinek. I'm going to, like Chuck Norris. I met Chuck Norris in Utah, Matthew, and Chuck Norris says don't drop names. So, sorry, Chuck. His real name's Carlos, by the way. But I used to email Simon Sinek in 2004. So in 2004, I'm back and forth with Simon Sinek saying, "Hey, man, I love this law of innovative diffusion, and we're left-siders." So myself and Simon Sinek would be like, "Hey, left-sider, how's it going?" Because we're early. We're early adopters. Everything we create, we're always early. It's not till we get over, that magical percentage, everything takes off. So when we bring this back down to New Zealand, there still doesn't exist a forum. There still doesn't exist a forum where we can put suicide in the middle of the circle and have every single person that's actually got a solution on those scales. Not here's a report, here's an idea. Who's out there currently delivering, stopping people killing themselves right now in New Zealand that has case studies and proof right now? Come to the table.
Yeah, to be honest, there are a few, but you've hit on a nugget of gold that I know and you know already, that very little is joined up, right? Very little joined up. And in my experience, and in fact, I got onto suicide prevention because my best mate took his own life, right? That's how I ended up in this. I have no qualifications or experience before he did what he did. But what happens is in New Zealand, as in Australia and other countries, the army of work and heavy lifters are individuals who have lost somebody close to them. So and in those moments we get angry as well because we believe that nobody did anything to help my mate, my son, my brother, my daughter, my wife, my husband, whomever, right? And so what we do is we go on that journey, and that anger takes us to creation. We think we now need to create something new, and so what we've seen seen over the years is a massive proliferation of a whole lot of something new. What we need to do is now take everything that we've currently got and look at joining it all up. And if that means consolidating some aspects of the bigger organisations that are out there as well, then kapai. But there are some programs that are out there that are starting to show some real promise. Mates in Construction, for example, that started in Australia, that's now here in New Zealand, off the back of some research we did in Australia about where the greatest number of suicides per head of profession were. The work being done as well with our veterans community, which is still quite early on, that came as a result of our engagement in Afghanistan and Iraq and support of the
I was heavily involved in that in Australia because I found a successful soldiers. Exactly what happened. So up here, my people know this. So up here, we've got Daryl Diphtheria blown up, killed in Iraq. Moose Makia, Desiree, and Mike Toon is my police sergeant that drowned in the river saving his daughter, right? So you're exactly right. This stuff happened in my life, and I built this as solutions for everyone else. But when everything was going through Senate in Australia, none of those, like I'm going to tell you right now, because I dealt with some of those high-profile ones, none of those recommendations from the first one have ever been implemented.
No, and that's a really valid point. The only recommendations that first came through, and in fact, it was a New Zealand-born senator, Judith, and what happened with her. She was Western Australia. She was also a Vietnam territorial war nurse, and she was part of the Senate inquiry overall into suicide in Australia, right? So that was the big one back in around 2011. Yep. So all of those recommendations that we took from that Senate inquiry are the ones that you see either already implemented, underway, or very well advanced. The sad thing is with veterans, because the inquiry, I think the inquiry was only a few years ago now, the government didn't quite get it right. And there was a whole lot of other stuff going on in defence, including massive allegations around harassment, the stuff that was going on at Duntroon at the time, and so on and so forth. So that is the one big ticket item. And ironically enough, it's not just exclusive, that problem, to Australia. It's also a challenge with New Zealand. We had a New Zealand serviceman who took his own life in Australia. He went into a forest, sadly, and ended his life. And that says to me that we didn't have crossover as well in our service provisioning between Australia and New Zealand.
Yeah, but we always had that at our network level, and it's only recently that's really been implemented. So we had a guy, I'm going to shout out, Wayne Lindsay was our go-to guy. So I was living on the Gold Coast.
Wayne Lindsay, that rings a bell.
Yeah, so Wayne Lindsay is the number one guy in the veteran support community that handled the crossover stuff. What does the law say between New Zealand? And then finally the RSA has appointed Valerie Church to liaise with that side. So now we've got that crossover, right? Yeah. And when I launched my book, The World's First Good News Book in Parliament, that's with the youngest ever Vietnam veteran section commander. And that book was submitted in a Waitangi tribunal hearing to help Vietnam veterans when they're trying to say that you have to prove, one significant event for your PTSD. So we're now part of history on the other side, but the people that have the solutions are the guys that are out here doing it all the time. And most of the time they don't have the skills or ability to articulate their solution with the data and the proof so that the system can pick it up and run with it. We hit this crash point where you give me any veteran you like and I've got a system to help them, Matthew. Like everything's there, but there's not that. This is the stock connection coming back around again. Yeah. So I'm gonna ask you to do something. File it away in the 100 million task list that you've got. Create a forum, a round table, because I know you're doing this globally for First Nation people. Talk to me about that, because when I heard that, I was like, all right, then, how are you doing that? Because that's really important.
Yeah, there's three parts to it. The first is having a look at our aspirations in terms of furthering Indigenous free trade, as an example, right? Yep. So number one, why can't we have Indigenous free trade agreements between Indigenous nations? I mean, and the example I gave a forum just the other day is that, Native American Indians in Canada, you guys are really good at maple syrup. In fact, you've cornered the market on maple syrup. Yep. Here in Aotearoa, we're really good at Manuka honey. We've cornered the market on Manuka honey. So what can we learn from each other in terms of joining up our sales and distribution or logistics supply chains? How can we have a look at joint marketing? How can we start promoting each other's products? The same is true with Aboriginal Australian whānau through Supply Nation, which has been a massive, great big procurement network over the years. And I like to coin the phrase bush tucker. bush tucker in Australia. Well, bush tucker in Australia is very much similar to things like kawa and so on and so forth here in Aotearoa. So why don't we have a look at joining that up? So the first one is bringing together our Indigenous First Nations peoples in a forum that we're now on our sixth one.
How do we get in there? Because my Pacific Island network's wanting me to bring coffee in, and my Chinese network wants.
Oh, easy. I'll send you the email and hook in because I'm coordinating it. Hey, the second one is around how do we build really good, effective public service people? Because here's the thing: governments come and go, but the public service remains.
Correct.
So we have an Australian New Zealand School of Government, for example, that's run jointly out of Wellington and also over in Canberra there. And I've said, well, actually, I want to see more of our Maori, Indigenous Australians, and so on and so forth, and the leadership roles at the top tier, not tier 3 and 4 or tier 2, but tier 1 of the public service. So we're currently trying to model up what we call the Indigenous School of Government. And that's a really interesting thing about where we can find our young people from around the world, but also how can we join them up? How can we join our Native American Canadians, our Chilean whānau, our Papua New Guinean whānau, Australian whānau, and so on and so forth? How can we give those young people the experience without connecting up? Because we're all trying to solve the same problems.
Yes.
Children in care is the same issue as children in care in Australia, as it is in Canada, as it is in Aotearoa. So that's the second big pillar. And then the third pillar is the Ideas think tank, which is again an online platform that we started year 1 of COVID lockdown, and joining up our Indigenous First Nations people. And here's the big problem that we've got currently. What big ideas can we fashion out of where we currently are? And so that all came about because I've been lucky and privileged. I've served in representative roles with the UN, Drake International, which is a big Canadian headquartered company, of course.
Yeah, I saw Ban Ki-moon's little thing for you, mate. I saw that.
Yeah, Ban Ki-moon, the old Banky mate, the old Banky. What I started out with was how do I harness those networks around the world to collaborate and come together? And sometimes some of the same people that helped me win my campaign for win the board seat at the UNGC, people like Margarita Ducci from Chile, Habib Al-Mashri from the founder of the Emirates Group in Dubai, she helped me out and so on and so forth. So what I've done is activate that network, because there's one thing that stands above everybody else.
I've got this written down. Say it, nephew.
The one thing that stands us about everybody else is our innate ability to tell our stories. Indigenous peoples around the world are great storytellers, and yet we don't harness that technique enough. And yet I do it every single day in business. So if I go to an annual general meeting or a shareholders meeting, there is no way on God's green earth I know I've lost that vote before I've walked into that room. Otherwise, I'm not going to walk into that room. Yep. So who do I need to ring? What do I need to do to ensure that I get this through?
But that's that village mentality. And when I wrote my notes down for the interview, being a good soldier doing my homework, we're going to start at the global level, because people that watch us in New Zealand are in smaller perception boxes, and it's got to start with your mindset and your thinking. So we started with our global thinking on adoption and innovation and execution. Robert Speculin, who wrote Excellent Execution, probably number 1 book in execution, is a friend from Singapore, so got access to these people. And then we're drilling it down to regionally. We're linking up, globally, First Nation people, and regionally, especially how we do that. But we are underestimated. Like, I believe that Kiwis have 3 superpowers, and I say it on stage all the time. I say I'm not that smart. I just have the ability to make really complex things very, very simple. That's my skill. And so Kiwis are underestimated. We are underestimated at our ability, because it's qualifications that have more status than lived experience and results. But you can't argue with results, right? The second thing is, we are just, the difference in Aussies and Kiwis. If you tell an Aussie you can't do something, he will just go through everything along the way, very, very loud and straight down the middle. You can't stop an Aussie, right? That's what I love about Aussies. Kiwis will sit there and figure out a sneaky, quiet way of just getting the result without telling anyone what they're doing. And once they get there, they're like, okay, that's how I did it. And so combining those two is really good. It's like, because we like that. Because there's an innate joy in us. So we're underestimated. We will always find a way, but the way that we find the way is generally really, really quiet. And that's where the innovation, I say sneaky, but I mean innovative, right? And we find a really innovative way to get there and get the result. We don't talk about how we got there and all the rest of it until we're there. And I think that's a strength and a weakness. But the last thing that everyone underestimates about Kiwis all around the world is our networks. But you're Maori, I'm half Samoan, brought up in Ngāti too, spiritually I'm Maori and Samoan. And I'm just an ex-soldier that's written a book according to people trying to do suicide stuff. You're like, I've got stuff no one else in the world has done.
That's
Our
right.
networks are phenomenal.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. When it comes to, and just coming back to the issue of veteran suicide, right? And as you and I both know, Afghanistan was a terrible environment. It remains a terrible environment. Iraq, the number of Australian servicemen and women and New Zealand servicemen and women who have served in fields of theatre and war and even peacekeeping, so the stuff that's going on in the Golden Heights, for example, that New Zealand's been involved with since partition of Palestine and Israel. The sheer number of those servicemen and women who have seen and witnessed things that other New Zealanders and Australians couldn't possibly bear to have witnessed, they're the ones that have come home over the years. And so our story needs to be anchored in not what we think needs to happen for them, but what they need for us to do for them.
Well, this is the point. I'm a veteran. I've served. Yep. I've been there. I've come back with post-traumatic stress from what I've experienced. The medical model, not interested in, because most of us aren't interested in that because it says we're weak and there's something wrong with us. We're not going to tell anyone. We just get on with it, right? So then I find the solution through PTSD, wrote the world's first good news book about it. It's the first good news trauma course in the world in the academy. And now we have solutions and out the other side, trauma, transition, evolution. So the trauma side is very simple to get through. PTSD is very, very simple to get through. Where we struggle is in the value. So you're through your nightmares, all the rest of it. And then now no one gives a shit about what you did and who you are now. Who cares, right? So in that value spaces, that's where we had to create the program and the mana. You've got to rebuild the mana through your value, identity, and purpose. So trauma is simple. If you want a solution to PTSD, it's very simple. So we've got that. Then we go into the value side. And the only thing that stops people getting out of a trauma into value is not wanting to release their trauma, because it connects them to who they were back then. That's why so many veterans get together, stay together, and do the same stuff, talk about the same stuff, talk about their PTSD every year. Those that don't want it anymore come into the space. I'm sweet with my trauma. Who the hell am I now? Where do I get my value from now? And that's where we can throw ourselves in and be innovative. They want to do something for these people. And then you get the choice to evolve. Now, you and I have evolved. We're choosing who we want to be and what we want to achieve. But you can't get to evolution until you've been through transition and you've got your trauma sorted out. So we've done that for the military, police, and frontline staff. I've got veterans all around the world doing it. And then through the protecting women side, we had to then do it for wahine. Yeah. And then we had to do it for tamariki. And then we made that whole framework suit for self-qualifying. Because even the way that you just said it, I got to challenge you on it. You know, we need veterans to tell us what we need to do for them. No, we'll tell you exactly what we need to do. You just give us the tools to do it. We'll do it.
That's what I mean.
Otherwise, it's like they're turning up for their handouts. Like, okay, so Dion, what do you need? Look, man, I know how to do my job. I need a couple of flipping trauma bandages and some flipping quick clots, which you're not allowed to use anymore. I need some more ammunition, all the rest of it. I'll go back and get my guys. You just need to give me the stuff that I need to go and complete the mission.
And that's the classic Dion case of why we need to devolve resources directly to those who know what to do with them. I mean, you know, we talk about PTSD and trauma. I mean, I'll never forget the time that I spent on the border of Syria and Turkey as the Syrian conflict began to emerge, you know, and you bear witness to some horrible things. Now, am I the right person to build those tools? Well, no, there's probably somebody better out there who knows what they're doing. But what I can do is advocate for the transfer of resources, including putia, over to the very people that know what they're doing.
But like you say, your story is critical to that component. You can say, hey, these are my thoughts, feelings, and behavior, and at least it's on the table and it's acknowledged. When you don't acknowledge someone, that energy just stays there and it just eats them. If there's no way to express that energy, one of two things is going to happen. It's going to burn them from the inside out, or as soon as you put a lightning rod in front of them in any way, shape, or form, it's going to explode. And then can
I just say the other thing that I think you've cottoned onto that is completely important is how then that behaviour might metamorphosize in the whānau, in the whare, in the home. And that's where we see whānau at risk through domestic violence, our tamariki at risk, and a lot of it is unintentional because we're not dealing with this over here, and therefore all of these.
You're 100% right. And listen, and I'm probably getting in trouble now. I might lose my flipping contracts now with some of these when I say this. No one was interested in engaging me to help tamariki until they knew about my trauma background.
Yeah. And
here in Palmerston North, the Oranga tamariki staff are phenomenal. I was a community cop here 17 years ago, Matthew. And some of the bosses for Oranga Tamariki were the community workers for the YMCA back in the day. So they're still here, good community people, right? And so when they said, oh, we need you to deal with this youth, he's, well, what's a classic one for OT? Not engaging, he's reoffending, and we're trying to get him back with his whānau living in the same house. You and I both know the issues are happening with the whānau in the same house. He's got nowhere else to go. He's too young for a benefit, and he's just going to kick on and do what he wants. But he suffered significant trauma, and he won't talk to his counsellor or his psych. Just won't even talk to them. So I come along 6'4" for 3/4 sleeve Samoan tattoo, and I walk down and go, hey, listen, here's my background. I was this dude up here, very scary, dangerous guy, and I broke. And I lost mates, and I couldn't control my thoughts, feelings, and behavior. And when my daughter was 5, she snuck up on me to give me a fright, and I turned around, I was going to knock her head off. That's the start of my story, and all the boys go, oh. And so all the young people I'm dealing with in care and protection and youth justice, they see a big, strong guy, not staunch that I'm going to intimidate them, but I'm strong enough that they can get behind and I can protect them from what they're scared of.
Yeah.
So if I got a young 14-year-old, we walk uptown and a bunch of patch dudes come up and start causing any hassle. One, they're not going to, because they wouldn't do that with me. And secondly, they know I'm trying to help that kid. And then the other thing is, once they see that side, if it's okay for someone like us, like veterans and soldiers, to break, it's okay for them to break. But as soon as you speak that same language, like, are you crying for no reason yet, Matthew? Now you come back from Sinai, you're sitting there watching a really cool thing on YouTube of some fluffy cat and burst into tears yet. And everyone's, right. And so everyone goes, how the hell would you know that? Been there. You know, have you sat on the end of your bed and looked at your kids and just burst into tears because you're terrified for their future? Yeah, done that. Have you ever wanted to go to sleep and not wake up and just want all this stuff to go away? You know, so when you start having these conversations, they know, hey, bro, you understand. But here's the kicker. So we all get to the stage where we ask one question that we just muck around with. What do I do? Dion, just tell me, what do I do? Cool, bro. I'll tell you exactly what we're going to do. We're going to do this, then we're going to do this, we're going to do this. Cool. Let's go. So you've got to have the solution with the steps that they can follow. Then you have to walk with them. And so what we're going to do, Roger that, I've got five minutes. So what we're going to do in the Line Academy is we're actually going to build our own Line Academy facilities. We're going to build our own villages, Matthew, where they can come and live with us. Okay, so we've got 45 people at capacity at Te Aotearoa Tonga at Youth Justice Centre up here in Palmy. Give me 20, they come live with us. No locks, no doors, away from the community. They're still, under centres, but they're going to live with us in the village and learn all this stuff. And so that's where we're going to get to. But I need to hit one thing in the last 5 minutes, which is really important. And hey, we'll book another time to continue this. I'll try and get down to Wellington and scribble a lot of this on the whiteboard for you, because I think we've got so many things that can help with what you're doing that are already working.
Well, come around to my house in Auckland, because I actually live in Auckland. I'm not, even though I was born and raised in Upper Hutt, I unfortunately just have to come down here for work. And
I went to Upper Hutt College.
Oh, did you? Oh, same fan, Silverstream, bro.
I did. No, I used to live in Whiteman's Valley and Silverstream.
Oh.
Yeah, my mum and dad used to own Follyfoot over Mangaroa Valley.
Oh, really?
Yeah. All right. So here's something. There's narrative that's trying to divide Maori and everyone else. And that's annoying me, so I'm going to jump in and sort it out. So this is the statement that I'm using in the Line Academy for my people globally when they're asking about this and here at home, and I want your feedback on it. The Treaty of Waitangi is a legal agreement between Maori and the Crown, right? And so that's anyone that identifies as Maori and the Crown, which is the government. It doesn't bind anyone else in the country, any way, shape, or form, unless they are operating under a government something. For example, I own the Line Academy. It's a New Zealand business. So in my business and my policies and procedures as a business in New Zealand under our rules, I have to adhere to what's in the treaty. I'm cool with that. Everything in the middle, any Māori that don't identify or agree with the treaty, it doesn't bind. That's how it sits. So there's a whole group of numbers like, oh, Māori getting this and Māori getting that. Well, Māori and the Crown have their own separate agreement. That's between them. No one else, unless you're under the business side that you're having to cover off on what the treaty says in law. Is that correct from your perspective?
No, not necessarily. I mean, you've got to go right back to when Te Tiriti was first signed, and it's that word treaty, tiriti, that is a central tenet of the foundation of the New Zealand democracy that we have today. It was a partnership between Crown and the Indigenous First Nations people of the land, ergo Māori. What we haven't done, and we haven't had a discussion about, is what this looks like in the context of where the country is going to from here. And that means constitutional reform. So, for example, New Zealand doesn't have a constitution like the United States does or whomever does, right? And I would wager you that with the passing of the head of state, Queen Elizabeth II, which, you know, she's done a great job. She's a fantastic lady. But we will have to have a conversation about what our future constitutional arrangements look like, and that means having a look at what the treaty means in that process, a partnership between Māori and the Crown, the evolution of our constitutional arrangements, if that makes sense, and that in stone will set forward what New Zealand might look like into the future. It could be in those future arrangements that we have a look at whether or not we need an upper house. We used to have an upper house of Parliament of New Zealand called the Legislative Council, and that was done away with in the early 1950s, like the Senate is in Australia and so on and so forth. And in those models, like the Italian Senate model, you are able to draw in your diaspora. The number of Italians living overseas also have representatives through regional geographically based senators. And
that's
so
interesting because that's what we're seeing now.
Well, that's right. And you see that representation. So Italy has it. I mean, you can see it in the conflict with Ukraine about just how many of the couple of million Ukrainians are wanting to now move. They're going home. They're boarding buses and planes and trains and automobiles, and they're going home to fight for their whenua. So what this means is we haven't had that conversation because we've never entertained it in the context of constitutional arrangements. We've just been wrapped up in this debate about should we become a republic or not. Well, that doesn't help. The other thing too we've got to be careful of is the descent into madness of non-Māori who see this as just Māori trying to go for some sort of co-governance arrangements and te mea. Well, if you have a look at other First Nations peoples like Jamaica, like Barbados, like Sri Lanka, even Pakistan, who have all gone down the path of detaching themselves, say, from the Westminster system, who have now their own heads of states and so on and so forth, they haven't disconnected themselves from the Commonwealth. So we need to have all of those different discussions. So it would be very helpful, instead of just talking about what the treaty meant at the time it was signed, the useful argument is about what does a treaty mean in the context of our future constitutional arrangements.
Which I think needs to be that next conversation, because I got 4,000 people in the academy and 300,000 in my first level network. And we need an infographic picture of this thinking, because we don't have it. I don't have it. I mean, I've just gone and done my own thing, and if I don't have to because I own my own stuff. But this is really important, even as an infographic for this thinking. So I really appreciate your time. I've
got an official sitting just off camera saying, "Come on, Matt, we've got to go."
Oh, he can jump in here and say hello if he wants. Absolutely. I'm going to share this. I know your views on the protest. You've documented that. Won't talk about that. And I'm also going to post a video I did of my mate, who's actually a veteran, who's down there and why he's there. And he's not associated to the idiots down there. He's a good Maori flipping head of his whānau who's lost some stuff, and he's quietly doing things legally. And I don't want his flipping story monstered by all the other stuff. So I'm going to put these interviews both up together.
You know, Dion, there are whānau down there at that protest. There are whānau out there who aren't even at the protest. They have a kaupapa to prosecute. They've got a kaupapa that we should have a discussion about, no doubt about that. My fear from the very beginning is, though, that very serious kaupapa is overwhelmed by, quite frankly, the silly buggers down there, the right-wingers, the supremacists, the racists, the nut jobs, the tin foil hat wearing people, and all the rest of it. The fringe element has come to the protest. And that saddens me, because we need to have honest discussions about our way forward post the pandemic.
We need that forum. Help us create that forum, please, Matthew, so we can actually come in and have the discussion. And this is going to grow, because that energy doesn't have anywhere to go. It's just going to expand. There'll be protests all up and down the country until someone takes that energy and puts it into this neutral space. Lance Burdett's a master at this stuff. Listen to him. Get these guys offside and have the discussion.
I have been, trust me. I have been having side discussions with some of the people, quite a few of the people down there, with those very serious kaupapa, from oranga tamariki to suicide to having lost their jobs, closure of small businesses. I had another one this morning. I've met with roughly about 80 people over the course of the last 2 weeks. No one's paying me to do that. I'm doing it because I know, like I said before, you take away the fringe element and you've got everyday New Zealanders who are fearful for the future.
Yeah, absolutely.
And some of them just want somebody to talk to. I pay short shrift to the other idiots, to be really blunt with you, and I want them all to go home in the protest and go home. But at the same time, the very people that are down there and across the country that have a serious scope up to prosecute, we need a forum for them to be able to speak their truth.
Absolutely, and a special shout out to all our men and women in uniform down there doing their best. You're the meat in the sandwich, and it's Crisis Leadership Month, and I think that's the main issue, and we'll talk about it another time. Thank you for your time. Sorry to the official off camera. I'll buy the coffee next time, and I'll be in touch online. Appreciate your time, Matthew.
No problem. Kia ora, Dion.
Kia ora.